Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power. It's a brand new show taking place before the original 3 films. It's set to come out tomorrow on Amazon Prime Video. And I was lucky enough to see the first 2 episodes last night at Cinemark, so I actually got to go to the theater and watch the first 2 episodes with a theater full of Lord of the Rings fans. And it was a really cool experience, and it was just because I'm a Cinemark Movie Club member. It's not like they're paying me to say anything, but I just wanted to throw it out there because it's a pretty cool membership. As I sat down in the theater, I had my fiance next to me. There were no trailers, it was pretty cool, no previews, and the show starts in a way very reminiscent to Game of Thrones. We get tons of characters being introduced. It's panning across the map to different lands. It reminds me a ton of Game of Thrones in that way. It gives this feeling of being very epic in scale, but unfortunately, that's where the similarities stop. Now, this first episode had a lot of work to do. It had to make us care about these new characters. It had to introduce us to all the lands they're in. It had the world build. And I recognize how hard that must be. I can't imagine taking on the project of figuring out what to do with the first episode of the new Lord of the Rings show. But with that said, I have to critique it, so here we go. So I'll start with the characters because it spends a ton of time introducing them in the first episode. They come right out of the gate with highly emotional scenes. Parts that you would typically build up to happen right away. It's very clear, what does a character feel about a certain thing? What are their motivations? But with that very direct way of introducing characters, it also makes it feel like they took no time to flesh them out. And because they didn't let it sit with us at all as an audience, it kind of makes you not really care about their convictions or what's even going on. And it almost felt like the creators of this understood that there was kind of a lack of that at a certain point. So every character in the show, really early on in one of their first scenes, gets the opportunity to monologue. And it's this super emotional monologue, tons of emotion behind it, and it's just super serious, and there's always another character kind of just listening to them talk. It kind of gave me I'm 14 and this is deep vibes. Another show recently that kind of made that mistake is Midnight Mass, where there's a character talking for way too long about this topic that isn't that deep to begin with, didn't really build up to that point, and it just comes off as cringy. And that's what this was. Really, really cringeworthy. And I'm not against monologuing. I think there's a way to avoid it coming off as cringy though, and the way to do that is by actually building up to the point where you understand their convictions, you feel how they feel. You don't just do that right out of the gate. It just felt empty and hollow. And I think that's a theme throughout this show, is that the storylines feel thin, lacking in substance. This whole show as a whole just feels soulless. And it doesn't help that in general, I thought it was kind of poorly acted. It's not that any one actor in particular was bad, but it's just that something was not convincing about it. It's really hard to explain. I didn't buy in. And again, it might be the script. I'm willing to believe that because everything was just so rushed, and it just felt like I don't care about literally anybody or anything going on. And then we get to the second episode, and I was hoping things would come together and we'd get a pretty solid episode, but unfortunately, it was more of the same. And it was in the second episode that I realized I was bored. I hate to say it, I couldn't wait for the episode to be over. I mean, we're getting incredible scenery, don't get me wrong. The landscapes, the wide shots are gorgeous. You can tell that this show cost a lot of money, which by the way, Amazon is said to have spent around $500 million on the first season alone. I'm pretty sure, if I read correctly, that that's making this the most expensive show ever made. And to be fair, it looks like it. It's gorgeous. I saw it in a movie theater and it looked better than a lot of movies. It was incredible. But it's kind of like playing a game that has really, really good graphics, but then you're kind of stuck with nothing to do in the game because, well, graphics only go so far. And that raises the question, does money really equal a good movie or a good show? I don't believe it does, and you can look down the list of most expensive movies ever made, and a lot of them I'm not even a huge fan of. And honestly, if studios really thought that the more money they spent, the better the product, I think a lot of studios would have done that by now. I'm sure they would love to just be able to throw money at something and say, hey, make this as successful as Game of Thrones. And I think it's pretty obvious that's what Amazon's doing here. This feels like a soulless shell of a show with really nothing to give you other than nostalgia. And those are the best things about the show, is the nostalgic music from the original 3 films. Some of the costume design is really, really cool. But again, why are my favorite things the things from the original 3 movies, 3 of the greatest movies ever made? In reality, they have one of the greatest properties on this planet, Lord of the Rings. Those books came out so long ago and they still hold up today. We have Dungeons and Dragons and tons of other fantasy things that take from Lord of the Rings still because it's just so good. And keep in mind, they could have done anything with this. I think that's why I'm being even harder on it, is because you could do literally anything with it and this is what they did? And really, there's not much else to say. I think one of the reasons for that is honestly because this show just feels so empty. All I can really say about it so far is that it's poorly acted, storylines feel hollow, and there's a severe lack of real emotion that you actually get from watching this. Something that's really strange because the original 3 films did such a great job of that. I also have to say, I'm not sure who this show was made for. I'm wondering if it's supposed to be more for kids almost, because there was some comedy in it that just didn't work for me, but I could see kids kind of enjoying it, and it sort of felt like a PG version of Lord of the Rings, if that makes sense. So I'm wondering if they're trying to sort of appeal to the masses here more so than Lord of the Rings did. But to me, it feels conflicted. It's almost like they don't know what they want to be. Anyway, I love Lord of the Rings. They're 3 of my favorite movies of all time and 3 of my favorite books of all time. I'm holding out hope that this is going to get better. I'm going to be watching every single episode and reviewing them as they come out. I'm sorry to report that it's looking grim so far. I hope everyone enjoys it more than me, and I also hope it gets a lot better from here on out. Anyway, be sure to subscribe if you can. Really appreciate it. Thanks.